You're listening to the #1 podcast for nonprofit leaders, getting your nonprofit fully funded. This is the Fundraising Masterminds Podcast. How many organizations started 100 years ago with a certain goal?
Right.
And then, next thing you know, they've got mission drift. They're like completely off from where their founders envisioned. But I think it would be good to define failure by looking at what success is.
Right. To me, accomplishing your mission, staying on target with your mission, that is what success is.
Welcome back to another episode here at the Fundraising Masterminds Podcast. My name is Jason Galasinski, and with me, my co-host Jim Dempsey.
Hey, Jason.
Well, how are you doing today, Jim?
No, I'm good. This is a good time of the year. I love May is really one of my favorite months, to be honest with you. I just, it's June starts to hit into summer, but I almost feel like you're starting to get to beginning of the end of summer in a way. But no, spring, May is a great month, so I love it.
Yeah, we're off to the races with the Perfect Vision in our mentorship program. We've got a ton of people signed up, and we're 2 weeks in, just hitting the ground running. So super excited about what's going on there.
Eyeballing the fall already, which is just amazing to think. But the beauty is that we're getting a good start. That's always so important.
Yeah. Well, today we're going to be talking about something a little bit serious, and I'm just going to warn our listeners ahead of time. This episode is going to be a little bit too close to home. It's going to be a little heavy hitting. And
it's more serious than we typically talk about. We get fairly light because we sometimes we take nonprofit leadership and development too seriously, and I think we need to be a little bit more lighthearted. But this is more of a serious topic.
Yeah. We're going to be talking about the #1 reason why nonprofits fail.
Right.
But before we get into it, if you wouldn't mind subscribing or hitting that like button, and we would love to know what you think. So write some comments in as you're listening to this, and let us know if you agree or disagree, or just let us know if you agree or disagree and what you think, and let's have a conversation. This isn't us saying, we know what's best, but we have seen a lot of nonprofits fail. Yeah. And we're trying to, in this episode, kind of pinpoint like the root cause, like what actually.
Yeah, there's a lot of symptoms.
Yeah, there's a lot of
everything
reasons.
From a strategic plan to, a number of things, but we're getting to the root problem.
Right.
And because this is so controversial, this topic, I be sure to comment in the comments section, because we'd love to hear your opinion. You may just say, man, you guys are just way off on this one, but I'd love to hear, especially if you agree with what we're saying.
Yeah. So buckle up your seatbelts, because we might be pushing some buttons that might trigger some things in you. I don't know.
I know
for me,
ride.
As I was going through this, I was like, oh man. Wow.
It's home. It's too close to home.
Yeah, I'd just love to ask you right off the bat, like, just throw out some things. What are reasons why nonprofits fail? In general,
there's just a myriad of reasons. Most of the time, it's because people don't plan.
Strategic plan.
No strategic plan. We plan to fail because we fail to plan. Mm-hmm. And, not having a budget, not having a good development plan, not hiring the right staff, not having a good mission or singular focus. It's just a myriad of reasons. And in this case, I'll say symptoms to a root problem, and that's what we're going to address today.
Another one is the real root problem. Maybe the board.
Oh, sure.
Is another reason why
getting the wrong board members.
How many people just get their friends on the board when they're starting?
Absolutely, or they just want to get people on the board so they don't mention anything about fundraising. And so that's part of their responsibility. And so, there's just, there are so many different.
Fundraising,
itself is a big
just
issue.
a big issue, right? We talk about fundraising a lot,
right?
Leadership issues, right?
Absolutely.
Dealing with staff, opinionated staff. What are other reasons why, failure tends to happen? Well,
it just a lack of focus and not being able to truly understand how to achieve your goal. We forget so much that the bottom line is always about our audience and those lives. You and I always talk about what's the impact that's going to be made. And sometimes we can get so caught up in the day-to-day activities and doing things, we forget what the that. Right. This is why we exist. And, the fact that the phones didn't work today. Internet was shut off for some reason. Our receptionist was sick today. We can get so caught up in those small things that overall are insignificant.
Right.
They're important in the moment, but have no impact on our mission. Yeah, we can get caught up in those things.
Well, I think it would be, some of you might be listening and saying, well, what do you mean by fail? Like, what do you mean, like, how do you know if you've failed, exactly? Because some of the things that you're describing, like internet going out and things, getting caught up in the day-to-day, well, that's just kind of normal life. And, that doesn't mean I failed.
But people make such a big deal about those things when they're going on.
Right.
And we lose sight of things. The old analogy, you lose you lose sight of
like
the
mission
forest
creep.
because of the trees.
Yeah. It's easy to have mission creep. How many organizations started 100 years ago with a certain goal.
Right.
And then, next thing you know, they've got mission drift and they're, way off in left field and they don't even, they're like completely off from where their founders envisioned. But I think it would be good to define failure by looking at what success is.
Right.
So maybe what we should do is just start with success.
Yeah.
So Jim, I think, and tell me if you agree, but success in an organization looks like having a really good, solid idea of where you want to go in the next 3 to 5 years.
Yeah.
Having the funds to be able to accomplish those things, having alignment with the board where the board is all in agreement. They're all on board. They're all
moving in the same direction together.
I've heard someone say once that, organizations move at the speed of trust.
Right.
So
I like that.
If you don't trust people,
right,
you're not going anywhere.
That's right.
And how often, we're just afraid of things, and we're looking over our shoulder and saying, oh, is he really, on my page or, and we don't, so if we can all trust each other and we're all moving in the same way, then we're going to move quick.
Yeah. I was on a board in the early 2000s with a ministry that was just accomplishing great things. And I think it's because the board was so aligned. In fact, I can't remember a vote that we had that was not unanimous. And that's pretty rare for a, 6-person board, but that's the way it was. And I think that's why we accomplished so much.
Yeah.
To me, accomplishing your mission, staying on target with your mission, that is what success is.
Yeah.
It really is.
So if you don't have a clear, specific goal or vision of what you're trying to do in the next 3 to 5 years, and you don't have the funding to do it, and you don't have the board alignment, and you don't have your team working towards that, and you're like laser focused on like, we're accomplishing this, and every day you're going in and you're making progress, and everyone's excited. Usually people get excited about, just look at all the stuff that Elon is doing with SpaceX, and every time there's a rocket launch, they show the staff in the lobby, and everyone's like jumping and like, we sent another rocket, and they're excited because they enjoy accomplishing something hard, and it builds teams. So like if we're really solving world hunger or, bringing the gospel into all the schools and, like, why wouldn't we just be the most excited people? So if we're not having these things, then I would say you're stagnant. And if you're stagnant, you're probably on the way to failure. So that's kind of how I would define failure.
But it's funny, Jason, because we hear now of all the successes of SpaceX, but what we forget is those failures in the beginning. Elon had failure after failure after failure. In fact, they were almost right at the brink of bankruptcy when they finally hit it, and have been on an upward trajectory ever since. No pun intended. But they, it really took those failures to get to success. So failure is not a bad thing.
Right.
But it's how we respond to failure and how we deal with it. And if we can turn that failure into a success, it's when we have that prolonged failure that we have troubles.
Well, and that's so true with all entrepreneurs. Like when you look at what Steve Jobs went through.
Sure.
When you look at,
he was fired from his own company.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there's just a lot of stuff that entrepreneurs have to go through to, break through.
Right.
And I think in many ways, nonprofit leaders have an entrepreneurial spirit to them, because in many ways you're trying to solve a problem and you're trying to bring a solution to a community or to people, and that requires you to have a bit of an entrepreneurial spirit.
Right.
And just because of that nature, you're going to face failure. You're going to face opposition. So Jim, as you and I were talking about all these different things, we kind of lined them all up, and we were like, what do all these things kind of have in common?
Yeah.
Because it seems like there's kind of a common thread here.
Right.
And kind of what we came up with is, it's almost like the common word that we kind of came up with was like resistance.
Absolutely.
In a sense.
Right.
So it's like, there could be like external resistance.
Yeah.
There could be internal resistance. Right. There could be, like your board not agreeing with you. It's like, it's some kind of form of resisting you.
Resistance takes a lot of different forms.
Right. So we believe that the number one reason why nonprofits fail is because of resistance.
Yeah.
Resistance. And this, hang with me. You might be thinking, "Oh boy, what is this?" What
are these guys talking about?
It seems like an abstract concept. We're going to unpack this a little bit. So we're going to go through what we mean by resistance and how you come across resistance on a daily basis.
Right.
And so, and if you think about it, right, I'm just going to give a silly example, but how many of us, hit the snooze button when we know we're trying to get up at 6 a.m. in the morning, right?
Or that we should, and that, it means getting up to
and
take a cold plunge or go to work or whatever it is. Yeah.
This is a simple example. It also happens with work. Like, I know that I should be more active, and I'll be honest, I hate working out. I know I should work out, but every time that the thought comes into my head about going to the gym or whatever, I'm just like, oh man, I just don't want to do that. And so my point is that I like the alarm analogy because we can all relate to,
hitting that snooze button.
But the point is that you make a plan at night, right? You're at 9 o'clock at night. You're like, okay, I'm going to get up at 5 a.m.
Yeah.
I'm going to
go work out.
I'm going to go work out. Yeah. I'm going to read my Bible. I'm going to spend time in prayer. And then that alarm goes off, and you have like a 2-second little thought where it's like, I know what I should do.
Every alternative is running through your head.
Yeah.
Does this really matter? The weather isn't nice outside. It's cold. It's rainy. Whatever it is, my car.
Or just just don't feel like it.
Yeah.
You wake up and you're just like, oh, I just feel so tired.
Yeah.
And you have a moment there though. That's what we're trying to get at. There's a moment where you can choose.
Yeah.
Right. There's a moment where you can say, I feel tired. Yeah. Oh, but I'm going to get up anyways, I feel tired, but I'm just going to hit that snooze button.
Right. And you got to believe the snooze button was created because of resistance. Because, at some point someone
easier.
At some point someone said the pushing the stop button is not enough. Let's delay that a little bit. And that's resistance.
And really, when you really think about this, there's external resistance and there's internal resistance. Right. I would define external resistance as things that we can't control.
Forces outside our control.
A hurricane goes through your city and wipes out your building. You couldn't control that. No. Certain things happening with
the economy, inflation, whatever it is.
So you can't control certain things, but you can control how you react to it.
Correct.
You can control how you handle it.
That's right.
Right. But I think what we're going to focus on in this episode is more internal resistance. And that's why I said this is going to hit more closer to home.
Yeah.
And so a lot of what's really happening on a day-to-day basis is internal. There's things happening inside of us and inside of other people that are resisting.
But aren't they almost the same, Jason? Because you said that external, it's how we deal with it. But internally, it's how we deal with it as well too. I mean, it really comes down to us. And the old adage that when you're pointing at someone, you've got three fingers pointing back at you. When there's problems, it may not be the other person; it may be you.
As we were talking through this before the episode, we really kind of thought through 4 steps that you can take to overcome resistance. So, Jim, the first step in overcoming resistance, I believe, is recognizing that you are in a war.
Absolutely.
So much of life is just understanding the context of where you are, right? Like if you think about your childhood, growing up.
Yeah.
You just woke up and the whole purpose of life was just to have fun and eat.
Yeah.
It was like, what are we having for dinner?
Yeah.
And when do I get to play with my Legos? Or when do I get to play with my friends?
Yeah.
And at some point in time, we kind of start to realize like, oh, we're a part of this world and there's other things going on. And
well, I mean, first of all, there's just pure survival. We need to get a job to be able to survive.
Yeah.
But when we move into the nonprofit world, it's a little bit different. Certainly there are people who look at ministry as a job, and if I have to go to work, I might as well go to work for a good cause. And those people exist, but so many in ministry are there because they realize that there's a battle going on, that there's a war, and it's a war against a number of different enemies, and we're going to talk about those enemies in just a minute.
Well, and if you're trying to stop world hunger, or you're trying to start a Christian school, or you're trying to create a camp,
obliterate abortion, whatever it is.
I mean, if you're trying to do those things, there's always going to be people who are going to resist you.
Absolutely.
You're going to be coming up against resistance. I mean, even just the idea, like just tell your family as out of the blue, I think I'm going to start, a Christian school.
Yeah.
They're going to say, what are you, nuts?
Right.
Just right off the bat.
There's a million Christian schools out there.
Yeah.
Why don't you just send your kids to
those? Why don't you just get a job?
Why do you have to start it?
And I've had people tell me that many times, like, why don't you just get a job? Why are you, always trying to start businesses and doing all this stuff? You're struggling, clearly, it's hard, just do what we all do.
Why do you have to solve a problem in Zambia? Why start reaching the heart of Zambia?
So just the idea of saying, I think God is calling me to this. You're automatically going to have people coming in saying, why?
Right.
That's stupid,
Right.
And I think from a Christian perspective, we're coming at it from a spiritual perspective of any time that we try to take ground away from the enemy, which in our case, we're talking about, a spiritual battle. The enemy's going to fight back.
Right.
So we're automatically going to have resistance there.
Yep.
So you got to kind of go into your day thinking like, I'm in war and we're trying to take ground and the enemy doesn't want us to take ground. And you can't lose that focus. As soon as you get complacent, then you start to have problems.
Well, I love Ephesians 6:12. I think it says it all. For we do not wrestle against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the cosmic powers over this present darkness, against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly places. I think that says it all. That's our opposition. That's our resistance.
Yep. But sometimes, people kind of over spiritualize things. I feel like.
Oh, sure. We can all do that.
Satan is not omnipresent. If you didn't know that already, sometimes we act like he is. So like Satan can't be, in Chicago, causing so-and-so to stumble and then be in Tennessee at the same time. Now he might have lots of minions that are out there, doing stuff. And I think the screw tape letters is a good kind of analogy of that. But sometimes I feel like we over spiritualize things.
Satan's around every corner.
I'm sure you've heard, the whole thing of like the world, the flesh, and the devil. Right. Are kind of like our three main kind of oppositions.
Right.
And so let's break that down a little bit. So like the world is basically just, a scripture verse there would be like 1 John 2:15, which says, do not love the world nor the things in the world. If anyone loves the world, the love of the Father is not in him.
Right.
So obviously he's not talking about like the planet, right? He's talking about the things of the world, materialism,
right?
He's talking about getting caught up in the world, just falling in love with the pleasures of the world,
right?
And so how can the world kind of pull us away from our calling, Jim?
A lot of distractions. There's just a myriad of different distractions in the world. Everything from food to, that new car that's out there, to homes, to keeping up with the Joneses, making sure that...
from a nonprofit leader perspective, though, it might be like, I'm not getting paid enough. Or I'm not.
Well, honestly, keeping up with the Joneses can happen in the nonprofit. I can't tell you how many organizations I've felt like we're resentful of crew because we have this many staff and that we have this large of a budget and that we're able to have an impact around the world. But on the flip side, I see our own staff saying, gee, I look at XYZ ministry and they're able to do these things because they're not so big. They're more nimble. You look at organizations like Focus on the Family or Alliance for Defending Freedom or Passion, that we had for years, we had a winter conference for our college students in Atlanta, and all of a sudden the Passion Conference came up and just greatly overshadowed that. And there were people that looked at that with some resentment to say, oh man, they came in our space. They took our people, they took our kids, whatever. Oh, come on. Really? If God is moving, we gotta embrace God moving. But we all can do that. Yeah, even in the nonprofit world. Comparison is terrible.
Right. The flesh, right? So Romans 7:18 says, "For I know that there's nothing good in me, that is my flesh. The desire to do what is right is there, but the ability to carry it out is not."
Yeah.
So the flesh is something that we all struggle with. And, from a biblical perspective, we know that we are all born into sin, right? We all struggle with sin. We all struggle with doing this. There's this internal battle. And it's not even like Satan, it's just that we have fallen. We have a fallen nature.
We do.
Right. So the scriptures talk about the old man and the new man.
Right.
So we know in John 3, Jesus was having this conversation with Nicodemus, and Nicodemus was recognizing that Jesus was from God.
Yeah.
And Jesus kind of flipped the tables and said, you won't be able to see the kingdom unless you're born again.
Yeah.
And Nicodemus said, well, what do you mean by being, obviously he thought born again,
going back into
your mother's womb. How is that possible? And Jesus
Yeah.
said, no, you have to be born of water and of spirit.
Right.
And so, so because of that, we know that Jesus was basically saying, when we're born of water, we're born physically, but we're born spiritually dead.
Yeah.
And then we have to be, born again, to be alive in the spirit. And that's trusting in Christ.
Right.
But just after, when we become born again, it doesn't mean that we don't struggle. Right. We still have the old man. So Paul talks a lot about this in Romans, where he says, the old man wants to go this way, and the new man wants to go this way.
Right.
So we got these two natures inside
opposing
of us.
views. Yeah.
And in a sense, even within our own body, even within our own souls, we have these two opposing natures, and they're constantly hitting each other.
Right.
And so when we are called into ministry, right, and the Lord says, I want you to start that mission in Zambia.
Right.
There's that desire to do what God wants us to do, and we're fired up about it.
Right.
But then our flesh takes over and is like, oh man, that's gonna be a lot of work.
Right.
Oh man, I got to do fundraising. Oh man, I'm gonna have to fly over there, and I'm gonna have to get shots, and I'm gonna have to do all this work, and it's just easier. So we have to recognize that we are our natural nature, the old man, is always going to want to gravitate towards pleasure. It's always want to gravitate towards what's easy. Is never, doesn't want to get into arguments with people, and so, but then at the same time, if we're called to do hard things, then we have to overcome that, flesh at some point, right? So that's a form of resistance. So even inside of us, we have internal resistance between the old man and the new man, constantly resisting. So understanding just that exists is important, right? So we've got things of the world resisting us. We've got our internal flesh resisting us. And then, the devil, it says in
1 Peter 5:8 says that be sober-minded, be watchful. Your adversary, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion, seeking someone to devour.
Clearly, Scripture says that Satan is out there, and he is looking to destroy us.
Yeah, absolutely. He's seeking us out. We don't need to just stumble into him. Unfortunately, he's looking for ways to make us stumble.
Right. So we got to understand this perspective that we're in a war, right? We're warring against the culture,
right?
We're warring against ourselves, and we're warring against the devil,
right?
And like, quite honestly, a lot of the problems that we struggle with are just ourselves.
Wow.
Like the way we deal with things.
Yep.
And so that leads me to step 2.
Jason, this makes me want to just hit that snooze button right now and go back to bed because, man, I don't want to get up and have to battle every day.
Yeah.
But actually we do.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the goal of this episode is to help you, overcome failure, right? So,
but first you have to identify the problem. And the problem is us. In this case,
a lot of cases, the problem
it can be
is
us.
And that's kind of where we're getting at. It's always easier. If you notice in politics, like nobody ever says, you know what, I screwed up. I shouldn't have done that.
Right.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, very
Will
rarely.
you forgive me?
Yeah, very rarely.
When do you ever see a politician do that?
Yeah, nobody wants to admit their
They're
mistakes.
always pointing the finger at someone else, right?
Yep.
And we do that too.
Sure.
I mean,
absolutely.
Think
as Christians.
about, going into your church and thinking, worship leader didn't pick the best songs, or pastor could have said that better. So I want to get to step 2.
Yeah.
So first step is, understanding you're in a war.
Yep.
Second step is understanding the lies of the enemy.
Yes.
So if we're in a war, we have an enemy.
Right.
And that enemy is constantly lying to us.
That's right.
Right. And
he's the master of deception. He wants to, he uses kernels of truth, Jason, that things that start so true, but a majority of it is just lies.
So first we want to start to recognize the lies, right?
Yeah.
So actually a really good takeaway, I didn't say this in step 1, but a really good takeaway with kind of understanding and learning about your enemy is anytime that you feel that temptation to resist, but then you kind of cave in.
You give in,
write it down.
Yeah.
Write down when you did that. Write down what it was, what the circumstances were, and you're going to start to notice
a trend.
And every morning when I try to get out of bed, I think I'll just sleep for 5 more minutes, but then I actually sleep for 3 more hours, and I miss my flight or I miss getting to work on time.
Or instead of going to bed at 10 o'clock, I stay up till 10:30, 11, start to get hunger pains and start to snack, go into the refrigerator. And I wonder why I'm packing on, 10 or 15 or 20 pounds more.
Yeah. So, just taking steps to write it down is really helpful because it helps you to actually see it.
Right.
But it's the same thing with number 2. Now, this isn't like a comprehensive list, but we wrote down some things here, like the lies of procrastination.
Yeah, absolutely.
So just the idea of knowing what you should do, but someone's telling you, you can do it tomorrow.
Yeah.
Like how often?
I'm going to deal with that later, Jason.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And, a lot of times, we have a big vision to accomplish something, but yet one of the hardest things of starting something new is actually starting.
Right.
Like I can't tell you how often this has happened to me, and I'm sure it happens with you, but you're like, oh man, I'm going to start this YouTube channel, or man, I'm going to start this podcast, or I think we're going to start
a new program, post-abortion counseling program or something.
Yeah. And then we're just, we know what we need to do to get started. Yep. But we just think,
trying to get traction.
I'll just check my email.
Yeah, that's right.
I'll do it tomorrow. Let me grab a cup of coffee.
Yeah.
I don't really.
Yeah, I get to deal with that power failure, or the Wi-Fi is out, and we always find a million excuses why we don't have to do something.
Yeah. So understanding that the resistance is kind of lying to you and saying just do it tomorrow.
Yeah.
And so being able to push through that and say no, I'm going to do it now.
Yeah.
So another one of the lies of the enemy is what we refer to as the shadow calling.
Yeah.
Now the shadow calling is essentially where you don't embrace your full calling.
Yeah.
You kind of know what God is calling you to do,
right?
But you do kind of a different version of that.
Well, you take the path of less resistance. It's easier to do this than do the hard thing or do the thing that you're called to do.
Right.
So we can settle for less, and it's still in a way kind of the calling, because it's part of your mission, but it's the less difficult, the easier version.
A good example of that is maybe you feel like God is calling you to start a Christian camp.
Right.
But you're just like, you have a heart for kids, you love working with kids, and you're in children's ministry, every day at your church, and you're working with kids. And so you're getting a piece of that, but you don't feel like that's exactly what God has called you to. You feel like God's called you to do this big thing.
Because it's harder to start a camp than it is to just serve in your Sunday school.
It takes risk to
right.
actually step out in faith and do something. And so because it's scary and because it's unknown and because we don't know what the result is, it's easier to just say, well, I'll just keep, I'm really serving the Lord here. And so we can kind of justify kind of staying in our shadow
settle
calling.
For the easier.
So that's the idea, is just that the enemy will always try to keep us in the easier path.
Right.
He doesn't want us to step out in faith, and he doesn't want us to take risks.
Right.
The other thing that we wrote down is pleasure over fulfillment.
Yes.
So the main thing here is like focusing on the short term versus the long term.
Yeah.
And so how does that play out in ministry?
Well, sometimes we talk about you win the battle, but you lose the war. And essentially you are, instead of looking at the end result and the pathway to get there, sometimes the pathway to get that end result is not easy. It may be filled with potholes. It may be filled with speed bumps, and you don't want to have to go through all that it takes. So you go with something less, and you go with something that's short term because it essentially means less pressure and less.
When we see this all the time with development, right? So people, it's easier to do a fundraiser than it is to focus on building relationships.
And development, because so development's a long-term plan, a long-term process, and the results come at a longer time, but they're more solid. You're building a solid foundation. It's easy to do a car wash and to, you get in there, you get out, and you're not spending months preparing for that.
Yeah. So you might know that, the long term, the best thing is to build relationships, to to have a development plan, to write letters, to take people out for lunch, to build those friendships. But it's easier to just do a car wash. It's easier. Let's get a bunch of people together and sell cookies. It'll be fun. We'll bake cookies and we'll go out and we'll sell them, or let's do a baby bottle campaign.
I knew this organization in Canada recently that instead of doing a dinner, they decided to go ahead and just do a Facebook post at year end and said, we're going to save you the guilt of being invited to an event, and instead we're just going to ask you to give at year end. Well, you can imagine the results they got. That was easier for sure on the staff, on the leader, but they ended up raising significantly less.
Another one of the enemy's tricks up his sleeve, in a sense, is full sedation.
I mean, you think about being sedated. That's essentially a pain medication. You're taking something that's going to suppress the pain, and that's what we do in our lives. I mean, we look for those things that are going to suppress the pain. And
how many of us like pain?
No, no
how
one
many
does.
Of us, you see these things on Instagram where it's like people are jumping into ice water, and they're like, I'm like, I'm never going to do that. Are you crazy?
And Jason, but think about in our lives. I know in my life, and you probably too. Where did the real growth in your life come? Yep. It came from pain. And so, no, none of us want to. We want to avoid it. We want to settle into the more comfortable, pathway of doing things.
Yeah. So, what does this look like with nonprofit?
We can talk ourselves into keeping busy. We can say, "Oh, I'm just so busy with the day-to-day operations. I can't get into doing something big. I can't start a new program. I can't hire these staff because I'm so busy right now." We actually can convinse ourselves that is the rational decision and the right thing to do because you're so busy. So we can talk ourselves out of making the needed decisions because of all the things that we're doing. It's essentially justifying those things.
I read a book one time called The E-Myth. It's actually really, really good book about entrepreneur. It's called The Entrepreneurial Myth.
Oh, wow.
It was a #1 bestseller like years ago.
Okay.
One of the main points in that book is that you're so busy working in the business that you don't actually work on the business. And as a business owner, or in your case, as a nonprofit leader,
right,
your job is not to work in the business. Your
right,
job is not to be answering phones
yeah,
and doing emails and, you know, all the busy work,
yeah,
right? You should be focused on where are we going? Yeah. How do we get there? And you're like the strategic general that's like strategizing and like kind of helping everyone move in a direction, which means that you have to trust other people to do the job. And so much of, you know, entrepreneurs, they're perfectionists and we want to do everything ourselves. We want to be in control of everything, and it's faster to do it ourselves and it's cheaper to do it ourselves. But yet if we don't have a leader who's kind of steering the ship in a certain direction, then you're not going to get there, you know? So,
well, I think about the great wise advice that Moses' father-in-law Jethro gave him in the book of Exodus when Moses had all the leadership on his shoulders. Jethro had to come along and say, you're not going to survive this until you start to redistribute the responsibilities and essentially have other people do some of these duties.
Right. So some of the lies of the enemy are, you know, the lies of procrastination, not embracing your full calling, you know, falling into the trap of your shadow calling, accepting pleasure over fulfillment, and then just being fully sedated in the sense that you're just so busy that you're just not accomplishing. And you're doing a lot, but you're not actually doing
accomplishing anything.
And so we want to understand these things and really like analyze, am I doing these things? Where in this am I getting caught up? And, you know, it's different for each one of us. But again, it's like you want to write it down and you want to understand your enemy. You want to know that you're in a battle. And then the third thing is that you want to realize that Satan opposes big dreams. I know. A lot of how you can know and understand if your dream is actually valid is by how much resistance you're getting from the enemy.
Well, one of the things is, you know, our Perfect Vision Dinner strategy is a great example of that. I tend to say so many times to people when they keep telling me, I did a name storming session and I can't get any of my people to call to ask people to be a table host. I can't find my speaker. I can't get the right printer. Whatever it is, I will say to them, you know, the last thing Satan wants you to do is to succeed in this event. And there may be a reason why. This may be one of the best things that you've ever done. Satan knows that, and he wants to resist that. And sometimes the dinners with the greatest resistance are the ones that have a greatest success.
In our Vision Dinner course, we're trying to believe God for big things. And so we're trying to take ground. That's the whole point.
Right.
You know, we want you to take a major leap forward.
Well, part of our course is getting people to dream big and to look for those accelerators and get a strategic plan.
Yeah, and we see a lot of resistance.
Very much.
We see, you know, I would say, you know, maybe a third of the class usually, you know, kind of hits a wall. And we have to get on calls. We have to, you know, coach people through it and just be like,
but sometimes it's internal resistance. Sometimes it's board resistance. Sometimes it's resistance from Satan on those kinds of things. So it's all over.
So that leads to step 4. How do you overcome resistance? We believe that you can overcome resistance by being intentional, by having intentional action, and relying on the Lord for that intentional action. So there is a certain amount of intentionality that you have to have. And one of the worst things we can do is be idle. But you know, there's a lot of things in here we could talk about. You know, there's circular motion versus forward motion. So
circular means you're just running yourself around in circles. You're chasing your tail. Forward is continuing to look towards the finish line, towards the prize.
My dad is a sailor, and he loves sailboats and stuff. And he actually wrote a book about how sailing is like an analogy to life. But one of the kind of the analogies that I like to think about is, you know, if you are in an ocean and you just think about all the waves, you know, moving around, and you're in this sailboat, but you don't have your sail up. You know, the sail's down. The boat's not going anywhere. It's just going to get tossed around by the waves. It's just going to be thrown around. You're going to throw up because you're going to get sick. But as soon as you put that sail up, boom, and the wind fills it, now the boat is cutting through all those waves and you're just moving in a direction, And so he makes this analogy of like the sail is your dependence on God, and the wind is like the Holy Spirit hitting.
I love that.
So you're putting up that sail and you're saying, I'm depending on you, and then this Holy Spirit's hitting that and pushing you forward,
driving you.
And then the boat is you moving through the waves. He uses all kinds of analogies of like the rudder and all the different things.
Sure.
But it's just that idea of, if your sail isn't up, you're just going to get tossed around.
Yeah.
And so you need your sail up. You need to be depending on the Lord, and you need to be intentional.
Yeah. One of the great things that Bill Bright put into the 4 Spiritual Laws when he wrote it was this battle back and forth between emotion and logic, that we can our faith in Christ and our walking in the Spirit can get caught up in that emotional thought of things, and emotions ebb and flow and they peak. But the logical side of things, if we allow logic, will be very steady. It's the same way in this. Emotions can play a big part in these things, and if we allow our emotions to control us, then or we don't have our emotions under control, then we can get off target. And this resistance, we're essentially opening the door to all these other things, these factors. And if we can stay more logical in our direction and where we're going, it's better.
Yeah. Well, a lot of this does kind of boil down to just like how we react to things and how we handle things. And one of my favorite scriptures is Romans 12:2, which says, "Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind."
Yes.
Right. So God wants us to be transformed, but it happens through renewing our mind. And,
a new way of thinking.
Right. And we're not saying, and I hope people aren't taking this away, because it would be very easy to kind of hear this and say, well, I'm just going to try harder.
Yes.
I'm just going to do better.
Right. I'm
just going to not allow myself. I'm just going to beat my body into submission.
Right.
But that's not what we're saying here. We're saying, we need to start by renewing our mind with recognizing that we're in a war, recognizing that the enemy is out to get us, and not just kind of putting off, like, well, I'm going to stop doing this. But the scriptures talk about putting on the new man, right? So you have to renew your mind with truth, right? You got to read the word. You got to get into a relationship with the Lord and allow the Lord to speak into your life, like who you are as a person, right? So much of what we struggle with is just identity, like who we are. And, we believe lies like, I'm a failure. I always screw up. But yet God sees us as a child of God, and he loves us, you know? And so much of it is you have to renew your mind. I used to work for a ministry called the Biblical Counseling Center. And they had this worksheet called the Biblical Model of Change. And it was kind of that idea of like, the biblical model of change is that, it's the process of sanctification. God saved you, but he wants to change you.
Right.
And so they had this, thing on the one side where you say, write down, all the areas that the old man is telling you it wants to do.
Right.
And write down what the Bible says, what the scriptures are saying, the new man is like this.
Right.
And then at the bottom it says, you choose, and it's like, at the end of the day, it's like we have a choice to make, you can choose to be the old man or you can choose to be the new man. And I think that's kind of like, at the end of the day, that's kind of the point that we're trying to make here. With this is that we are really in control to a certain degree. I mean, to some degree, we're not in control of some external things, but and a lot of it boils down to we can choose how we respond to things. We can choose to get out of bed at 5 a.m. We can choose to go to bed on time. We can choose to do the hard thing. We can choose to start that program. We can choose to sit down and write that vision statement or, so a lot of it just boils down to saying, I'm not going to check my email all day long, or I'm not going to just get caught up in this. One thing that really helped me was like time blocking. I think we were talking to one of our students in the Perfect Visionaire program. I think it was Brian from ISOW. And he said one of the things that really helps him to keep focused is by like time blocking out his day and saying, I'm going to take Wednesdays from 8 a.m. to noon, I'm going to do this thing, and nothing's going to stop me, and you just block out time. And that really helped him. There's a lot of little tricks we can play, but at the end of the day, you can time block, you can do all the things, but if you don't actually choose to do it,
that's right. That's right.
So I think that's really what it boils down to.
One of the things I think we need to realize, Jason, is that this is not our home. We are here for a short period of time, and our home is with Jesus, and that this in a lot of ways is a proving ground for us. God is using this time on earth for preparation to prepare us to come home. And these struggles, these challenges that we face are all ways that God is refining us and buffing down the rough edges in our lives. And I think we need to realize that fortunately God has a bigger plan for us, and that he wants us to be more conformed to Christ. And all these kinds of things are part of our way of being conformed to the image of Christ.
Yeah. So the number one reason why nonprofits fail is because we give into resistance.
Absolutely.
But the good news is that you don't have to give into resistance. You can start today to make good choices.
Right.
And it starts with prayer.
Right.
It starts with getting alone with the Lord.
Getting on your knees.
Take a day off and just pray.
Right.
That's right. Get back to why you do what you do. What is it that got you into this in the first place?
And I'd recommend a regular time. Don't just do it once or when you're having trouble. Do it on a regular basis that you can count on.
Yeah. And get yourself back in touch with the Lord, get yourself rooted, make a plan, and then take steps to block off time and do the plan.
Right.
And so much of it is just recognizing that, there is going to be things that come at you. So not allowing yourself to be thrown off.
Right.
But that's part of it.
Yeah.
And then, being gracious with yourself and knowing that you're going to fail.
Right.
We're not perfect. We're going to make mistakes. So stay humble, apologize, when you need to. Say you're wrong. I wish there were more people in this world that just said, I was wrong. I messed up. I'm sorry. But you forgive me.
Right.
But that's, I believe, how you, keep yourself from failing. Have a strategic plan, know where you're going, and take actionable steps, specific actionable steps to get there.
Yeah.
And we're here to help you. The Perfect Vision Dinner is a great way to take action and make something happen
and continue to move forward, and trust God.
And we often say, one of the reasons why I love your program so much is because, we're holding their hand, we're holding them accountable.
Right.
We're taking them through a process, and we're not allowing them to hit that resistance. We're we're going to do this. And we're going to make you do it. So if you're looking for a program that wants to help you, really push through, check out the Perfect Vision Dinner mentorship program. We'll put a QR code on the screen. But Jim, I don't know. I enjoyed this topic.
Oh, I did too.
Kind of a fun topic.
It's a tough topic, but it's important to identify, as we talked about earlier, identify the enemy and identify those things that are causing resistance in our lives. And, sadly, in some cases it's ourselves, but it's all part of that transformation that God intends in our lives.
No. Well, if you enjoyed this episode, let us know in the comments below. Let us know if you do agree or disagree, or if there's other things in there that we could have added or removed or whatever. Just let's have a conversation. We'd love to hear your opinion. Hit that subscribe button because we would love to have you join us on the next episode. We got a lot of great content coming your way. And if you're a nonprofit leader and you're looking for some advice on how to, accomplish your goals with your nonprofit, we would love for you to check out the Fundraising Masterminds in the future. So hit that subscribe button, and also just share this episode. If you're thinking about a friend during this episode, one of the best ways to help someone is just to say, not calling out, hey, I think you're like this, but by saying hey, you might be interested in something like this.
Yeah, if you're a board member and you've got an executive director that's struggling with these things, share that with them.
Yeah. And, that's one of the great things about this podcast is it's easy for people to listen to a conversation, you know, rather than just having someone saying, you're the problem. You know?
Yeah. You can put it on your car, driving to work. We were talking to one of our graduates the other day, and he said he listens to our podcast when he works out. That's okay with us. We're good with being your workout partner.
Well, thanks again for joining us for this episode of the Fundraising Masterminds. We will see you next time.
Take care.